families. What do you reckon? Does the woman have the right to know who this man that she didn't get the last name of was?
Oh man, this is a Hollywood script waiting to happen, isn't it?
James, can you talk for the next 4.5 minutes on this?
Oh man, don't throw me the German loving of 3 days to speak to this.
Yes, you go.
Look, there's a lot of things we need to figure out. Why are there so many guys called Michael in Germany at this hotel?
Is it Michael or is it sort of Michelle?
Michelle, is it Miguel? It's a very cosmopolitan. Is it Berlin we're talking about?
Munich.
Munich. Well, it could be a Samoan. There's heaps of them on that side of the world. It could be. And is it their actual first name?
Well, that's exactly right. I mean, if she only got the name Michael.
So whose hotel room was this?
I don't know that many details of the story. It just says the hotel.
Well, because it was under her name. Was she drunk and signed up as Michael accidentally, and her name's Michelle? There's so many things we don't know about this. But when it comes to personalised data, that's what they've gone with. They've gone with privacy.
Yes. Although, Ali, the kid might want to know who their father is, right?
Oh, God, this is, I don't know whether I can even kind of comment on this. Yes, I see both sides of it. I absolutely see both sides. But at the same time, if you enter into such an arrangement, what sort of expectations are there on both sides? Whether, was there any agreement or discussion made? Did they think this through? If they didn't, then is it just tough? Should the child be the one that is essentially penalised, I guess, by not being able to find their father? I don't know. I don't know the answers to these questions. They're big questions.
How important is your personal data to you, James? I'm not suggesting this is a thing that might happen to you, but I mean, if you were one of the men involved,
let's ask the touring performer how important his personal data is to him.
Would you be annoyed if a hotel gave out your name after you'd stayed there?
I think the problem is that's generalising to any situation. I think if I had a child out there and they were giving out my name that is not an invitation, I just want to say to the New Zealand public, but if it was given out for that purpose, I think where I feel weird about the ruling is that the judges have put a very blanket decision on a very specific incident. It's a child trying to locate their biological parents. Now, maybe there's a better legal way. Maybe she's gone through it in the wrong legal way. But there should be a legal precedent or a legal manoeuvring where that can happen, where the child can find a biological father.
Here's an idea. How many Michaels were there, Megan, again?
4.
Okay, so it's not a huge number. Why doesn't someone get in touch with each Michael and see if they're happy for their personal details to be passed on? Privacy issue sorted.
That's far too practical for the drama we're trying to build on this story.
Julie's just pointed out that it's a bit like the story of Mamma Mia, which I think is an excellent moment to end on. I'm going to read one last text before we go. How sad that Te Radar can be admired for looking like he just got out of bed, but women can't even be on the radio without makeup. Thank you very much, Francis, for that. It is coming up to 5 o'clock, and that will be time for Checkpoint. Thank you very much, Ali Jones and James Nokise.
Thanks, Megan.
Thank you.
Tonight on Checkpoint, the Commerce Commission knocks back a merger which would have created New Zealand's largest news media company with 90% of the country's newspaper circulation. Fairfax's COO and NZME CEO join us, and how are newspapers responding to the internet? We go inside the newsroom of one of the country's oldest regional papers. The government's moving target for violent crime. A Christchurch mother says her children were told they would go to hell if they didn't believe in God during a religious education class at their state school. Congress tells US Airlines treat your passengers with respect, and a Dunedin surgeon tells a patient to BYO rather than eat his hospital meal.
RNZ News at 5. Good evening, I'm Anna Thomas. The government denies it's manipulating the numbers to make its violent crime reduction target easier to reach. The Prime Minister today outlined a new set of 10 targets for the delivery of better public services, including reducing the number of serious crime victims by 10,000 by 2021. That's well down on the target set 5 years ago. Here's our political reporter, Demelza Leslie.
In 2012, the government set an aim of reducing violent crime by 20%, or 7,500 fewer crimes a year by June 2017. But as of March this year, only 2% had been reached. The Justice Minister, Amy Adams, says the new goal of 10,000 fewer serious crimes by 2021, or about 2,000 fewer each year, is easier to measure and understand. New Zealand First and Labour say the government is fiddling with the numbers. From Parliament, Demelza Leslie.
The Commerce Commission's refusal to allow a merger of Fairfax New Zealand and fellow media conglomerate NZME has been backed by the union representing journalists. In a ruling released this morning, the Commission found the merger would have been likely to reduce both the quality of news and the diversity of voices available to New Zealanders in the media. Paul Tolich, the National Media Organiser for E2, says the right decision has been made.
The basic concept is the more companies you have operating, the more opportunities there are for journalism. This would have become a very slimmed down operation, which would have cost quite a number of jobs.
Paul Tolich. In Australia, Fairfax Media today announced plans to cut 125 editorial jobs, roughly a quarter of its newsroom staff, as part of a restructuring plan. The government has announced more funding to help schools work with violent children. Last month, principals said teachers are at breaking point because of growing problems with badly behaved and violent children. The government now says it will provide $34.7 million over 4 years to help children with behavioural issues, enabling the number receiving support services each year to go up from 5,000 to 6,000. A further $6 million over 4 years will be used to help 3- and 4-year-olds with communication problems. In one of his first actions as Foreign Minister, Jerry Brownlee has written to the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu seeking to restore New Zealand's diplomatic relationship with his country. Israel recalled its ambassador late last year after the United Nations passed a resolution co-sponsored by New Zealand calling for a halt to Israeli settlements in Palestinian territories and a cessation of violence. Mr Brownlee says one of his immediate priorities is to restore the relationship to how it was before that resolution. He has congratulated Mr Netanyahu on the 69th anniversary of Israel's independence. An early childhood teacher has told a court she may have tapped the hands of children but can't recall any specific situations where she smacked them. 59-year-old Lynn Euphemia Abraham is on trial in the Auckland District Court, where she's denied 11 charges of assaulting children, including smacking, forcing 3 to eat food, and sellotaping shut the mouth of another. Giving evidence in her own defence today, Ms Abraham said some of the children had behavioural issues. She said she would tap their hands to stop them snatching toys from others or flicking food with spoons. She denied washing a 4-year-old's mouth out with soap, but said she did wash around his mouth after he swore at another teacher. She said she told him she was washing away the bad language. The police say they still haven't figured out the full circumstances surrounding the death of a Gisborne girl yesterday. The 6-year-old died after being hit by a rubbish truck in Russell Street on her way home from Gisborne Central School. The District Council has confirmed the truck is owned by a contracted company, Waste Management New Zealand. It's 5:04. The All Blacks and Hurricanes hooker Dane Cole's return to play has been further complicated by the revelation he's suffering from symptoms of concussion. Coles hasn't played since mid-March when he got a knee injury. When he tried to return to training, he tore a calf and also began developing headaches. Hurricanes coach Chris Boyd says they can't work out if Coles suffered a head knock at any stage.
We genuinely don't know where he got those symptoms from, but those symptoms were not apparent to us until post his return to train from his knee injury and then tore his calf, and since then has had an inability to load his calf because not only of his calf but because he's been getting some headaches.
Chris Boyd. The gloves are off in the heavyweight fight between WBO title holder Joseph Parker and Razvan Kojanu. The Romanian's camp are unhappy with the contract arrangements for the fight after Kojanu was called in as a late replacement for the original challenger, Britain's Hughie Fury. Matt Chatterton reports.
Razvan Kojanu signed the contract for the fight before flying to New Zealand from Los Angeles last week, but his trainer John Arthur claims another 2 contracts have since been presented to him. Arthur says the issue is over a rematch clause and that it was only resolved last night. He says in 40 years in the boxing business, he had never come across anything like it, and the Parker camp wanted 3 or 4 possible rematches put in the contract, which he says shows they're scared Kojanu could upset Parker. This is Matt Chatterton.
And that's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Lee McKenzie tells the remarkable story of the fraudster Kenna Jones, who conned his way into senior hospital jobs with no medical know-how, preacher positions with no knowledge of the Bible. It seemed no one was immune to his charm. Lee should know. She married him. We have a window on the world of bluefin tuna, and this week's overseas correspondent is Silver Tamba on the line from Estonia on Nights from after the news at 7 at RNZ National.
And now the short forecast from Med Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland to Manukau, also Coromandel in the central high country. Cloud gradually increasing. A few showers but rain tonight until early tomorrow morning. The Bay of Plenty, Gisborne and Hawke's Bay. Rain spreading north tonight, turning to a few showers tomorrow. Horowhenua, Kapiti, Wellington and Wairarapa. Showers turning to rain for a time this evening. Northwesterlies gusting to 110 kilometres in exposed places. Nelson and Marlborough, rain developing this afternoon or this evening, becoming fine tomorrow morning. Bulla, Westland and Fiordland, heavy rain spreading north, easing to a few showers this afternoon or this evening. Long fine breaks in Westland tomorrow. For Canterbury, scattered rain developing this afternoon, then occasional showers. Northwesterlies gusting 130 kilometres in exposed places this afternoon. Otago and Southland, occasional showers. And for the Chatham Islands, mostly cloudy. Rain tomorrow morning, followed by a few showers. RNZ National, it is 5:07, and you're listening to Checkpoint with John Campbell.
Thank you very much indeed, Anna Thomas. We begin tonight with the Commerce Commission's resounding no. Fairfax and NZME will not merge. Staff with an audience of roughly 2 million people per month and nzherald.co.nz with an audience of roughly 1.8 million people per month will remain competitors. And the country's newspapers, and setting aside community papers, of which there are dozens, between them the 2 companies have dailies in Northland, Auckland, Waikato, Bay of Plenty, Hawke's Bay, Taranaki, Whanganui, Manawatu, Wellington, Marlborough, Nelson, Christchurch, Timaru and Southland. Well, in their physical presence, print on paper, they will continue to stand against a tide known as online. But for how long? NZME and Fairfax made the strongest case they possibly could. We hear from them both tonight. In short, they said the migration of readers from newspapers to websites has cost revenue, making the existing model unsustainable. But the Commerce Commission ruled the likely loss of plurality and therefore of a diversity of viewpoints and the concentration of influence over public opinion meant the merger could not stand. One key fact, the merger would have created a news media business with nearly 90% of the daily newspaper circulation in New Zealand. For the Commerce Commission, that figure was too high. The Commission also cited efforts already underway to create new models of engagement. NZME's managing editor Shane Curry was quoted speaking of the New Zealand Herald. We are seeing growth in our print readership, he's quoted as saying. Still, for NZME CEO Michael Boggs, disappointment obviously.
And I think the thing that I'm disappointed really in is nothing seems to have changed since November. We think we've put compelling arguments forward as to why this is the right thing.
What was the most compelling argument that you think you advanced after that draft decision?
Well, I think what we saw back in November and what I've seen in the executive summary of what we've received today, and unfortunately I haven't got to read 357 pages that we've just received just yet, but what they've really said is, look, there are real benefits in bringing these businesses together, and in fact they've tried to quantify those and have said there's between $40 million and $200 million of benefits over 5 years. So they've really put some numbers there and said, you know, this is good for the businesses and for New Zealand. But then they've come and said, we're worried about the quality of news and the diversity of views would be impacted. And that's something that they did say back in November. They were concerned about plurality, is how they summarised that. And, we've really questioned as to whether that's something they can take into account. So in receiving their news today, again, that it is a no, they've, in that 357 pages, documented their legal rationale as to why that's the case. So that's some new information we've only literally just received. And so that'll be our next step, is really looking into that. What's their rationale? Why do they think they can take that into account?
And so when you say next step, are you potentially going to appeal this?
Oh, look, we've got 20 days to make an assessment around that. And as I say, it's too early really to give any indication of that, because we haven't gone through that detail.
Right. If you don't
really
appeal it and you are stuck with this decision and you have to live with it and the merger is off, how will NZME change?
Well, look, I'm really pleased that, I've been the CEO of this organisation for just over a year now, and part of our focus over that last year has been on 7 priorities for the business, and that's been our key strategy and priorities. And one of those was progressing the Fairfax merger. Number 1, in fact, was actually let's continue to create great content every day that our audience likes and continue to grow our audience. And so we've been operating for the last year as if that merger isn't going to happen.
Did you undermine your own case with the way that you have worked to re-engage, reconnect, work at a micro level to keep and grow audiences?
Well, I think that's been the benefit of bringing NZME together. Previously we were 3 separate organisations. We were a print business, a radio business and a Grab One business. And we physically brought all those people together here in Auckland anyway over the last 18 months, and where we can around the regions have done the same thing. And we're really seeing the power of that. When we can do our storytelling now across all of those mediums, I think our audience is engaging in it, and therefore that's great for our customers. It's absolutely great for the teams who work here, because they get more skills and experience across those different platforms.
So therefore, why did you need the merger? And forgive me, that is not a disingenuous question. You're making a compelling case that business as usual is pretty good.
Well, I think, I'd be the first to say that, print is challenged. I don't stand here and say I think print's going to be a growth business for us into the future. We've slowed the decline, which I'm really proud of. But people are moving from print and to digital. And one of our key priorities is actually developing new revenue streams, and we'll continue to do that. And in the last 6 months, we've made some investments into some small startup business to help us with that. There's a company called Restaurant Hub that we've bought a shareholding in, another one called Rate Broker. So these are areas outside of journalism, whereas because we've built these great audiences and content that people want to interact with, we can then look to supply them some other products and services. So that is a key factor for us.
Right. We've heard from Shane Curry saying that they've done good work to arrest the decline of the Herald. Let's go into the regions. Bay of Plenty Times, Hawke's Bay Today, the Northern Advocate, the Rotorua Daily Post, the Wanganui Chronicle, and lots of community newspapers. What is their future as print organs?
So look, there's nothing that's come out of the decision today that makes us say our view of what's happening and the way people want to interact and get their news is changing. Do people want to read in newspapers? Absolutely they do. But do they want to read them in newspapers less than they did a year ago? They do that as well. So we are continuing to develop content that we can put into our newspapers, we can put on our digital sites, we can put across our radio stations, and we're using the talent that we have within the business to be able to go across all those assets.
Michael Boggs, CEO of NZME. Now, the Commerce Commission's decision doesn't discount the case for the merger, but it finds it less persuasive than the case against it. The merged entity would employ more editorial staff than the next 3 largest mainstream media organisations combined, and the concentrating of voices, resources and viewpoints into that single stable, and I quote, creates a real risk of harm to New Zealand's democracy. Here's COO of Fairfax, Andrew Boyle.
Well, we disagree with that. I mean, the brutal reality is that you have to have a viable commercial model that underpins your journalism, and it's our position and the applicant's position that we would best obtain that by taking the synergies of the backroom savings in order to achieve an at-scale New Zealand-wide business. And I guess that's we were very consistent with our view on that through the process, and I guess that's that's a difficult thing to reconcile as part of their decision. But clearly, next steps for us are to take a deep look into the rationale behind their decision, and to carefully consider what our next options might be.
I was reading the decision and I kept coming across the word plurality, and it's used 354 times. Well, I don't suspect there's a document in the history of the English language that has used the word plurality 354 times, and that's what you're up against, isn't it? That's what the Commerce Commission wants.
Look, it is. It's a position that is an unquantified one, but nevertheless one that they've placed a great deal of store upon. Our argument around plurality as early as straight after the draft determination, and particularly at the hearing of the public conference in December, was plurality is best preserved by having a sustainable economic model to fund journalism in the first place. And the Commission heard from a range of editors about the processes and the freedom they have to express their own perspectives on the mastheads or the websites in which they operate. So, but clearly on this occasion, that hasn't deemed to be a strong enough position for the Commerce Commission to change their view on that.
You talk about mastheads. You have 65 community publications, way too many for me to read out, but the big newspapers that you have are the Press, the Don Post, the Waikato Times, and then going down a little bit in size, the Manukau Standard, the Taranaki Daily News, the Marlborough Express, the Nelson Mail, the Southland Times, and the Timaru Herald. What is the future for them in print now?
Well, provided they're viable, we will continue to operate those. And I think it's interesting to point to the changes made this week at Marlborough, where the ability for us to publish that newspaper on a daily basis became uneconomic. And we went to that community in October of last year and consulted quite widely with readers and business leaders and advertisers and said, we want to be a part of the Marlborough landscape. We want to have a print presence. It's not viable to do it daily, and hence our decision to take a part-day frequency and combined with what we can generate digitally on stuff and also through an emailed subscriber digital newsletter to subscribers in the Marlborough community. That's a really interesting model that we will be monitoring really closely, and as a possible barometer to how we might tackle some other regional mastheads as their viability comes into question, in the context of this enormous structural decline in print advertising.
What do you think people want now? Because the world is changing so fast. And when I was a boy, if you wanted to read the newspaper, there was the Dom and there was the Evening Post, and that was the totality of it until you got to Sunday. What do you think people want now?
Look, I think that if I could reference the feedback we've had in Blenheim as perhaps a good way to answer that question. What they didn't want for us was to go away. And it's not inconsistent with other feedback we've had in regions of New Zealand. We've done our market research and talk to readers, and we do that very commonly. I think there's a real sense that people want localness reflected back to them through good local journalism, so that they tell the stories that matter to those people and to Kiwis generally. And we're very mindful of that. It's what we do in our community has always been a sort of a key plank of seeking to be an at-scale business that tells those stories. And so, whilst there is obviously an appetite that you can get from many sources around world news, and to a degree national news, there is still a fundamental appetite for what you can do locally. So we don't overlook the importance of being able to supply really local stories. Our challenge, and in particular in light of today's decision, is to say how we're going to, as a commercial entity, how we're going to fund doing that.
It's Andrew Boyle, COO of Fairfax. Fairfax Australia announced job cuts today, 125 editorial positions as part of a $30 million restructure plan in Australia. Sydney Morning Herald staff have gone on strike. There's no doubt more job cuts will happen in New Zealand at some stage, but Andrew Boyle says the merger would have meant there were more in back office, fewer in newsrooms. Now, in that interview, Andrew Boyle said Fairfax will look to local for its market survival in smaller communities. What you can't get from global websites is news about where you live. In Marlborough, the Express is now 3 days a week, but hopefully able to survive in that form. In Nelson, the Mail is 151 years old and an example of a community newspaper utterly determined to survive. Now, we wanted to look at local, and we chose the Nelson Mail. It has a daily circulation of 10,000, a readership of about 28,000, and a much greater online audience, as well as feeding stories into Stuff. And we couldn't have had a better reporter to look at the Mail for us than Tracy Neal.
I'm standing outside the Nelson Mail where I started my career as a journalist 30 years ago. They were the days of manual typewriters clacking furiously on deadline, writing stories in triplicate and sending copy on newsprint through suction tubes to typesetters and compositors. I got to do everything from interview royalty to factory floor workers and drive a minibus of drunk reporters to the annual union meeting. Today, I begin by asking what some readers think of their local paper.
The Nelson Mail does a reasonably good job at portraying the events of the city.
But it is a good way to keep in touch with local events.
I don't know much about it.
I read it actually on Facebook, so it's really interesting to keep up with what's going on.
Yeah, we read it at work. We get it every day at work. So yeah, I read it and like to see what's going on, sort of, especially within Nelson and Tasman and stuff like that. So yeah.
I read Nelson Mail every single day and I enjoy reading about what's going on in Nelson and what's coming up.
When I walk into the Nelson Mail newsroom, the team spirit still lingers. Editor Vic Guild has just ended a staff news briefing.
Oh, our lead story today is about a dangerous dog that's been ordered to be put down, and the woman is going to take it to the Supreme Court. She's fighting it because she doesn't believe that her dog is that dangerous.
It's the type of story that binds and divides a community. Ms Guild has been at the Mail since 2003 when she began as a sub-editor. She now heads 22 staff in offices in Nelson and in Golden Bay. She says a local paper serves as the village square and a soapbox as a platform for the public's voice.
It's really important for local newspapers to be connected to their community, so to be aware of what their community cares about. And you can get that feedback through letters to the editor in the old days, and now of course we can get that feedback through Facebook and digital pages as well.
Then there are the times the Mail has been at the forefront of national news. Former editor Bill Moore recalls the Cave Creek tragedy on the West Coast in April 1995. A viewing platform collapsed, killing 14 people.
The entire newsroom was stunned by what was unfolding on the West Coast. And there were people literally in tears in the newsroom when they were learning about what was going on. And you know, those are the sorts of days where everybody pulls together across the whole building, if you like, all departments, to try and get that news out to the readers.
Mr Moore says people work in the news industry for the greater good.
Not only the journalists, but everyone who works at a newspaper does feel that they're playing much more than just a commercial role, in other words, making money for a business. They feel that the work they're doing is actually an important part of the life of their community, and they still take that just as seriously now as the Nelson Mail has always done.
One reporter who knows that better than almost anyone at the Nelson Mail is its chief news director, Sally Kidson. She started at the Mail as a reporter in 2003 and describes, on a difficult day, what it means to be a journalist there.
These guys are just really passionate about what they do. They work really hard to tell the stories, and they work really hard to tell them in a way that people want to hear them. Sometimes they find it uncomfortable because they've got to ask questions that they know the person's not going to want to hear, but they're the voice of the community, really, and they've got that on their shoulders when they go out and talk to people.
Sally Kidson says the community needs to think hard about the consequences of not having a strong local paper.
We just serve such an important role in our community by advocating for people, by being there in emergencies, and if we're not there, it's just quite a scary thought, actually.
Ms Guild says the transition now is the biggest in the Mail's 150-year history, but she's confident the masthead will stay alive. In Nelson for Checkpoint, Tracy Neal.
We'll have more on the non-merger coming up. Colin Peacock is filing for us after 6. Also coming up on Checkpoint, should religious education be taught in state schools? A Christchurch mother removes her children from a state school after she says they were badgered and told they would go to hell if they didn't believe in God during a religious education class. And soaring property prices in Rotorua see values rise by 28% over the past year. We'd love your feedback on what we're covering tonight. You can text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. We're on Facebook, of course, Checkpoint with John Campbell, or email checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. And don't forget, you can watch us on Facebook, where we're live streaming. We're also on Freeview Channel 50 and Face TV, which is Sky Channel 83. However you were joining us, thank you for doing so. 5:25. If at first you don't succeed, change your target. That's what the government is being accused of doing by changing its target for cutting violent crime. The Prime Minister today outlined a new set of 10 public service targets, including reducing the number of serious crime victims by 10,000 by 2021. That sounds a lot, but is actually a much reduced target than the one initially set back in 2012. Here's our political reporter, Demelza Leslie.
5 years ago, the government set a goal of reducing violent crime by 20%, or 7,500 fewer crimes a year by June this year. As at March of this year, it was nowhere near that, with violent crime only down by 2%. Now the government has set a more realistic goal to reduce the number of serious crime victims by 10,000 by 2021, which is about 2,000 a year. But the Justice Minister Amy Adams says the new target isn't an admission the old one was unachievable.
10,000 is a much more tangible number for New Zealanders to get their head around than 20%, when most New Zealanders don't have a sort of sense of what that looks like. So we've been very clear, we want to have 10,000 fewer victimisations of these sorts of crimes. I think that's something that people can absolutely understand in a real sense.
But the Labour leader Andrew Little says the government is just fiddling with the numbers.
That's what happens when you govern and manage by numbers. You just manipulate the numbers and you do whatever you can to make the numbers look good. You don't deal with actual problems. This is not a government that is focused on dealing with actual problems.
The New Zealand First Leader Winston Peters says the government is being disingenuous.
This is a government that capped police spending in 2009. Didn't believe that there was increased crime in this country, changed the method of judging crime by a catch and release policy, and now realise that the public aren't falling for it, and now they're going to be making all sorts of announcements with extra police and extra initiative to try and tell you that they actually care.
Amy Adams says the change in target is deliberate. She says previously the violent crime statistics picked up a big increase in the reporting of family violence, which skewed the results.
One of the challenges at the moment is to know what is the occurrence of more of these events in our community and what is more reporting. So while we're trying to encourage more reporting, it somewhat cuts against a straight target. So what we've done in this iteration is be very clear we're going to report family and sexual violence alongside that BPS target, so it's very clear what the numbers are. But in terms of that reduction, it's a real reduction of the offences that we don't believe are significantly underreported and we want to see come down in real measures.
Ms Adams says it will still be a stretch for the government to meet the new target, but it's committed to doing so. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Demelza Leslie.
5:28. A Christchurch mother has withdrawn her children from a state school after they were told they would go to hell if they didn't believe in God. This was during a religious education class. It comes as the government is taken to the Human Rights Review Tribunal over a claim its education legislation is incompatible with the Bill of Rights. As Eric Frickberg reports, it's the latest development in a long battle over whether there should be any religious education in state schools at all.
Section 78 of the Education Act allows a school to hold religious instruction for up to an hour a week or 20 hours a year. The Secular Education Network is strongly opposed to this. It says all religion should be taught in an academic way and the Christian religion shouldn't be given preferential treatment. David Hines is a retired journalist and lay preacher. He says Christian thinking shouldn't be pushed in state schools.
It's a spit in the face for every other religion. It's saying Christianity is superior. It's telling the Jews that the Bible is a Christian book when the Jews have largely the same Bible and take an entirely different interpretation of it. It's a put down of atheists because it says you've got to believe in God to live a good life.
David Hines has gathered 26 witnesses for his case, including 13 parents who say their children were mistreated in religious instruction classes. One of them is Tanya Jacob of Christchurch.
We knew there was going to be these Bible classes, so we just opted out. Over time, we found that our kids were being put back in, and we found that the kids were being told things like you're going to hell and just generally badgered for not believing in God.
Also joining the case are leaders from 5 religions saying their beliefs were misrepresented. Another witness in the case is Paul Morris, Professor of Religious Studies at Victoria University. He examined 3 religious instruction courses used in schools and found defects in all of them.
They present Christianity from a more evangelical and literal perspective. The teachers' guides include prayer sessions, thanking God for the Bible, thanking God for his miracles. They do not address students who come from different faith worlds.
The Christian Education Council was unavailable for an interview but issued a statement defending its position. The council, whose aim is to equip and inspire children through values-based Christian religious education, says more than 600 schools throughout New Zealand invite its religious instructors in each week. It says, as the largest provider of religious instruction in the country, it's passionate about its continuation in New Zealand state schools. However, David Hines argues that the religious instruction already being done is not, strictly speaking, legal. He says the Bill of Rights Act prohibits state institutions from favouring one religion over another, even though the Education Act allows exactly that.
Those 2 laws are in conflict with each other, and that's what we're asking the tribunal to do, to make a ruling that those 2 laws are inconsistent. And if we succeed in that, a report will have to go to Parliament saying they should consider changing the law.
Tanya Jacob pulled her children out of school for a problem she says shouldn't have existed.
It's got nothing to do with normal education. If you want your children brought up in a faith, then you take them to your church or your temple or your mosque. That's not for school time. All our kids should be able to go to school without being made to believe things or harassed for not believing in things.
The Attorney-General isn't commenting on this, nor is the Ministry of Justice, except to confirm that a case has been filed. No date for a hearing has been set, but the battle lines have been drawn, with senior lawyers, including a QC, hired for representation. For Checkpoint, call Eric Frickberg-Tene.
Feedback already coming in very fast on this. Kia ora, John. I'm a retired teacher. Many years ago, I withdrew my own children from religious instruction in their state school after hearing Jesus only likes good children. God punishes children who don't listen, etc. And similar remarks from various volunteer instructors. Christianity, yeah, right, says Cam. Hi John, my 5-year-old daughter came home from her RE class at a state school with a bright red cap which says Jesus is Lord. And good grief, I took my daughter out of religious instruction class for exactly the same reason 40 years ago. How long is this rubbish going to stay in schools? Says Diane from New Plymouth. Thank you for your feedback. We'd love more of it if you have it. Text us 2101 or email checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. Coming up on the program, Nona has business news. A surgeon advises a patient to bring his own meals to hospital rather than eat ones provided by Compass. Childcare teacher denies slapping children and taping another's mouth shut with sellotape, and a Playboy model under fire after she posed for a naked photo near the summit of Mount Taranaki. And all we can say is we only hope it wasn't a southerly. Yes. And it would have been most unpleasant. Anna Thomas with the 5:33.5 headlines. Here she is.
Thanks, John. The government denies it's manipulating the numbers to make its violent crime reduction targets easier to reach. The Prime Minister today outlined a new set of 10 targets for the delivery of public services, including reducing the number of serious crime victims by 10,000 by 2021. That's well down on the target set 5 years ago. The 2 major media companies whose merger bid has been rejected are considering an appeal against the Commerce Commission's decision. The Commission has rejected the proposed merger of Fairfax New Zealand and NZME, saying it would create too great a concentration of media power. NZME's Chief Executive Michael Boggs told Checkpoint his company will scrutinise the rationale for the decision and is considering an appeal. Fairfax's Chief Operating Officer Andrew Boyle says it's also considering an appeal. The government has announced more funding to help schools work with violent children. It will provide $34.7 million over 4 years to help children with behavioural issues, enabling the number receiving support services each year to go up from 5,000 to 6,000. A further $6 million will be used to help 3- and 4-year-olds with communication problems. The new Foreign Minister, Jerry Brownlee, has written to the Israeli Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, seeking to restore New Zealand's diplomatic relationship with his country. Israel recalled its ambassador late last year after the United Nations passed a resolution, co-sponsored by New Zealand, calling for a halt to Israeli settlements in Palestinian territories and a cessation of violence. The Inspector General of Intelligence and Security has found that up until a few years ago, the SIS's electronic record-keeping systems for security clearances were not secure enough. Cheryl Gwynn has released her second report into how the SIS collects and holds that information. And that's the news.
Thanks so much, Anna. Let's turn now to business news with Nona Peltier, who is sitting beside me. Nona, let's look briefly at the market's reactions to the non-merger.
That's right.
Yeah.
So across in Australia, the market's still open there, but the share price fell. Fairfax's share price fell just a bit, almost 2%. That's only 2 cents to $1.85 Australian.
The market hates surprises, right? And there was a sense that the answer was going to be no, right?
Sorry, I just gave the wrong number.
That's
$1.06 was the share price.
Okay. Staff have gone on strike, so we may see Fairfax staff have gone on strike at the Sydney Morning Herald. We may see more action on the share price. What else are we looking at today? Sky City's new CEO has hit the ground running on his first day in the job.
Well, before we leave that, though, NZME share price, which is listed in the New Zealand on the New Zealand market, it fell more than 11%.
Right.
So that was a significant fall. That was down 10 cents to 79. So the market certainly didn't like that. No.
Okay, gosh, that's fascinating. Thanks.
So back to what you were just...
Sky
City, yeah. There we go. Okay, now, I was also, we had some other news that happened today, believe it or not. Yes, I was over at Sky City, the casino in Auckland. They had a very nice welcome this morning.
You were there on business? No,
I was there, yes, I was there. It was a very nice welcome for their new CEO, Graham Stevens. So he just started the job today. He's from South Africa. He worked for Sun International. They're the big casino operators there. And he's come here. He's stepped into the shoes that were left vacant, I guess, from Nigel Morrison when he departed a year ago.
Decamped.
Really, he just said, I'm going, bye. Yeah. And and so he's the new CEO. Nice guy. I had an opportunity to speak with him. I guess everyone else was busy doing something else, so I was the only journalist there. But, very nice welcome from his staff. Certainly he has a big challenge ahead. The Auckland, there was a lot of noise, the construction around the place. He's got, but he's only in the job one day. He said he'll give us an update once he has a chance to settle in later in a few months, probably.
Right. Dairy prices briefly overnight. They were reported on a morning report this morning, but milk powder, that was a good price, wasn't it? That was a good increase. Yes, it was.
In fact, that sort of started the ball rolling with the New Zealand dollar. So it gained a little bit. But then the labour market data, which was very strong as well today, that added more value to the New Zealand dollar. So it rose to a high of 69.7 cents US at its peak just after that labour market data. So it was finished up at 69.5 US. 92.5 Australian and 53.8. Now, all that could change overnight when the U.S. Federal Reserve come back on interest rates. No one's expecting them to move on interest rates, but they'll be listening very carefully for signals on how the U.S. Federal Reserve is interpreting that soft economic data that we've had out of the United States recently.
Nona Peltier, thank you very much. Lots of feedback coming in on religion in schools. We'll bring you more of it shortly, but surgeons at Dunedin Hospital are recommending patients ask family members to bring in food if they don't like provided meals. The hospital was caught in the middle of a bitter dispute last year between its food provider Compass and patients, political parties and unions who were all calling for Compass's contract to be abandoned. They claimed the food was inedible, labelling it horrific and disgusting, some of them doing so on checkpoint. But the Southern DHB didn't bow to public pressure. Compass vowed to improve and the issue simmered down. But a patient contacted us this week to say he thinks nothing's improved at all. And when he complained, his surgeon said he should get his wife to bring him in some food from home. We're not making this up. Zach Fleming has more.
I've seen better food fed to pigs.
Alan Clark, fresh out of Dunedin Hospital.
I just could not face up to it. It was shocking.
Recently diagnosed with bowel cancer, Alan was on a liquid diet leading up to his surgery the weekend before last. So he was, obviously, incredibly excited at the thought of something solid.
They put macaroni cheese on one meal, and it was just gluggy.
The mac and cheese Alan is talking about was cooked in Auckland, snap frozen, and then shipped down to Dunedin, where it was reheated.
I took a couple of small mouthfuls of it, and no, I couldn't face up to that one.
What did it taste like to you?
Oh, terrible. And it was only lukewarm too. It was shocking.
Then another snap-frozen, shipped-from Auckland meal came, this time corned beef. Alan says that was just as bad. And this isn't the first time Dunedin Hospital's food's been criticised. Early last year, Meals on Wheels volunteer Liz Green said she wouldn't even feed the food to her dog.
It was incredibly salty, it was full of water. The sausages in the casserole were, well, I wouldn't give them to the dog.
You wouldn't give them to the dog? They were that bad?
They actually went down the waste disposal. I have a fox terrier here who would have loved to have had a sausage.
And so you wouldn't give it to your own fox terrier?
No, and I wouldn't even give it to my chickens.
Fast forward last week, Dunedin Hospital, Alan started complaining to his surgeon.
He said, if you can't eat these meals, he said, it might pay to get your family to bring some meals in to you.
But he wasn't surprised that you didn't want to eat them?
Oh, no, it was no surprise.
His surgeon asked not to be named, but he said Alan didn't strike him as a complainer.
He was very reasonable.
And he said what he told Alan is indicative of what he tells other patients.
When a patient finds the food intolerable, then what often works best is you can suggest that, if they've got someone, a relative or someone who can bring something in for them, then that's a good idea to supplement what's provided.
So if you're in Dunedin Hospital and think the food's not up to scratch, the message is, essentially, sort your own food or deal with it. Southern DHB wouldn't say whether or not they think there's room for improvement, but Chief Executive Chris Fleming said he's happy with the feedback Compass receives from patients. But thinking we need to see for ourselves, we asked if Compass would give us some of the meals Alan was given. They said no. They also refused to be interviewed, and at the time of going to air were yet to provide a formal statement. But a spokesperson said Compass has a 97% satisfaction rating at Dunedin Hospital. However, they were unable to provide any documentation to back that up. They also said Compass invites all patients to leave feedback and responds to all complaints, but is yet to receive one from Alan. Alan says that's coming.
We've paid our taxes over the years. We're entitled to our hospital, and the food should go alongside it.
And with another surgery coming soon, he's hoping the entire experience was just an anomaly. For Checkpoint, Zach Fleming.
A sea of feedback on religion in state schools. Thank you. Before that, a strong economy, creating jobs. Nona was talking about this, particularly in the tourism and building sectors, pushing unemployment below 5%. Official data showed the unemployment rate fell to 4.9% in the first 3 months of the year as the economy created 29,000 new jobs. Sharon Brett-Kelly reports.
Strong tourist numbers and more construction in the regions drove the growth in employment in the March quarter. The accommodation, food and construction sectors accounted for more than half the new jobs. And Westpac senior economist Satish Ranchod expects that momentum will continue.
We do expect to see continued firm economic activity over the coming year, and that does indicate that we're likely to see the unemployment rate continuing to push down over the next couple of years.
Kim Richards, a partner at the recruitment agency Bureau, says the skills shortage is worse than ever, with some positions taking several months to fill. She says most firms are looking for graduates with 3 to 7 years experience.
There's not a massive amount of senior roles in the market. New Zealand's tiny, so most of the roles are sitting in the engine room of a business that are 3 to 7 years experience, paying a certain salary range. as soon as you start getting higher up the chain, there's fewer opportunities, so it becomes a lot more competitive.
But young workers in hot demand should not expect to name their price. Today's figures show demand for labour did not translate into strong wage growth. Annual wage rises remain subdued at 1.6%, below the rate of inflation. But Satish Ranshod thinks that will change.
Wage inflation has remained pretty muted until now, but we are expecting to see it climb over the coming year. The economy is running at a solid pace and inflation started to rise. That'll pass through to higher cost of living adjustments over the coming year.
The increase in the number of employed people was driven by more men finding full and part-time jobs, but not everyone is finding it easy to get work. Reese has an MBA and 30 years experience in the power industry. The 50-year-old Aucklander has been out of work for several months despite applying for at least 70 jobs.
Oh man, it just really sucks the life out of you, but what can you do but continue and persevere, because you only need one job.
His CV shows his 25 years in management roles, but he's had just a handful of interviews with recruiters and met with only 2 employers. Few tell him why he's missed out.
Only about 3 times, and it was over, a phone call, obviously, because folk are busy. And they basically said, hey, look, you're probably not a fit. We're looking for somebody who is, probably, younger and a bit more vibrant. We just weren't sure whether you were very passionate.
Reese is hoping that he'll be one of those to benefit from the continuing employment growth that's forecast, and says he's now willing to drop his salary by $50,000 if it helps him find a job. Mō te hotaka o te ahi ko Sharon Brett Kelly aho.
The preschool teacher charged with assaulting 9 children in her care says she only tapped hands but doesn't recall smacking them. Lynn Abraham is on trial at the Auckland District Court where she's denied assaulting children by smacking, force-feeding 3 and sellotaping a 4-year-old's mouth closed. She told the court that up to 4 staff would be on at one time and parents were regularly turning up. Our court reporter Edward Gay is covering the trial. Nice to have you in the studio with us, Eddie. What's happened today?
Well, these allegations were put to Miss Abraham. The 59-year-old, she recalled that a child had been swearing on one occasion. She said that she took this child off to the bathroom, washed around his mouth. She was clear. She wet a napkin. She washed around his mouth, not inside the mouth, as the charge suggests. She says that as she was doing this, she was telling the child, and he was only 4, that she was washing this bad language away. Miss Abraham confirmed that she had relayed this incident to her boss, but she was interrupted, she said, during this phone conversation. Her boss took over the conversation, as she put it, and she confirmed that she got a verbal warning for washing the child's mouth out with soap, but she says that's not what happened.
Right, allegations of tape over the mouth, another incident. What are these? Yeah,
she's charged with actually using sellotape, putting that over a child's mouth to quieten them down. Under cross-examination from the Crown Prosecutor Brian Dickey, she denied this ever took place. Her answers to the charges of smacking were slightly more complicated. At one point she said, yes, she had smacked the hands of children, and then she later sort of developed that she said that she tapped the hands of children. She said that she'd do that when they were snatching the toys from other children. She may also do that if they were flicking food around the place. She said that she couldn't, Mr. Dickey sort of asked her to recall specific incidents where this occurred, particularly around the smacking, and she said she couldn't recall specific incidents. And towards the end of his cross-examination, Mr. Dickey asked her if she had smacked the children because she was tired, because she was too stressed and she wasn't coping. Miss Abraham denied that was the case.
A senior staff member gave evidence today, is that right?
That's right. The woman, she has name suppression. She said she didn't spend too much time at the centre, but that in April last year she got a call from Miss Abraham about the behaviour of one of the children. That's this swearing episode. And she said that Miss Abraham said that she had washed the boy's mouth out with soap, and once she had disclosed that, this senior staff member said she asked Miss Abraham how she could do such a thing. She said she responded by saying that that could constitute child abuse, essentially, and she, after a meeting with Miss Abraham, she gave her a verbal warning. Under cross-examination from Miss Abraham's lawyer, Graham Newell, this senior staff member confirmed that she didn't get Miss Abraham's version of events in writing, and that she had also chosen not to tell the parents about this allegation of washing the mouth out with soap, despite actually having a meeting with the parents about the kids' behaviour. The trial before Judge June Jealous is due to finish on Friday.
Edward Kay, in the court, in the court and then in the studio with us. Thanks, Eddie, really appreciate it. Let's go to Rotorua now. Property prices have really rocketed up there. It's been Auckland, it's been Queenstown, lots of talk about Wellington on Morning Report this morning. But Rotorua, the popular tourist town, tops the list of fastest growing property prices over the last year, with values soaring nearly 28%. What is going on? Anusha Bradley finds out.
The average property price in Rotorua has hit nearly $396,500. That's an increase of more than a third since the last market peak in 2007. QV's spokesperson Andrea Rush says prices in Rotorua have been climbing solidly for the last 18 months, when new lending restrictions began to hit home buyers in Auckland.
And that's when we saw Hamilton and Tauranga values rising. And when some people got priced out of that, they started looking further afield, and Rotorua was a popular choice.
Rotorua real estate agent Hilka Oppers says the town's attracting investors and first home buyers seeking a bargain.
So in 2015, we ended up getting a lot more of people with KiwiSaver applications through getting into their first home. So that has contributed to it hugely as well. The other factors are that the rental return in Rotorua is very good, so there's real good cash flow.
The publisher of Property Investor magazine, Philip McAllister, a Rotorua local, has long predicted the boom.
We've thought for some time that it was going to be a market which would grow strongly, and there's a lot of reasons, not just that houses are already cheap here. I mean, we've got population growth going on at the moment, so we cracked over the 70,000 mark recently. The council's getting their act together, and there's some good economic development going on. There's actually a shortage of houses, so there is a bit of a supply-demand imbalance.
But what about jobs? Rotorua Mayor Steve Chadwick says there are plenty.
Oh yes, there's jobs. There's definitely jobs. Trades, services, hospitality, and particularly tourism and retail. We know that our recruitment agencies are very busy. The listings are up 16% on last year, so it's all starting to happen.
With rentals increasingly hard to find, Ms Chadwick says there's growing interest in subdivisions and new property developments. While Rotorua is definitely more affordable than Auckland, which has an average house price of just over $1 million and has its share of top-end sales too. In the 6 months to the end of March, 7 homes sold for more than $1 million, including one that went for $1.5 million. However, QV's Andrea Rush says the latest monthly figures show Rotorua may already be coming off the boil as house hunters look further afield for a bargain.
It's interesting to see Opotiki, Gisborne, Whanganui, some of those places now starting to see faster value growth than they've seen since prior to the previous peak. Also nearby Kawerau district has had some strong growth as well, but when you're coming off a value base in the 100,000s, it's easy to get 43% or 50% value growth, which that area has also been seeing.
So while Rotorua may not become the next Auckland, it's clear the tentacles from New Zealand's largest city's booming market are creeping further around the country. For Checkpoint, Anusha Bradley.
The US Congress has told United Airlines and other US airlines to sharpen up your acts following the incident last month which saw passenger David Dow dragged from his seat and down the aisle of an overbooked flight. Congress says if the airlines don't make changes, it will introduce legislation aimed at improving customer service. This report from Reuters.
The head of United Airlines hauled before Congress Tuesday, and he wasn't alone. Airline executives from American, Alaska, and Southwest all grilled by Republicans and Democrats, united in condemnation over what they see as industry disregard for passengers. The Republican head of the House Transportation Committee had a stern warning for the executives and their peers.
Get together collectively and figure this out, because if you don't, just like Mr. Gibbs said, like Mr. Capuano said, we're going to act, and if we act, it's going to be one size fits all. Seize this opportunity, because if you don't, we're going to come, and you're not going to like it.
The threat of new legislation coming in wake of this video showing Dr. David Dow getting violently dragged off a United flight in April because he refused to give up his seat to make room for United staff after the airline failed to find volunteers. The video sparked widespread outrage around the world. United CEO Oscar Munoz was forced to apologize yet again.
I'm personally sorry for the fact that my immediate response and the response of our airline was inadequate to that moment. No customer, no individual should ever be treated the way Mr. Dow was, ever.
The scrutiny going far beyond the industry practice of overbooking flights, which United and American continued to defend. They say it keeps ticket prices down. Southwest, however, says it plans to stop doing it. Lawmakers also complained about baggage fees, cramped flights in coach, insensitive and cranky airline staff, flight delays, basically every imaginable gripe ever uttered by any passenger.
The problem with the flying experience is across the board. We all know it's a terrible experience.
The anger could mark an unwelcomed turning point for the industry. After years of successfully fighting off any new legislation, airlines could soon be in for turbulent times in Washington, even with a business-friendly, Republican-led Congress.
The actions of a Playboy model who posed nude near the summit of Mount Taranaki have been described as inappropriate and disrespectful by local Māori. Jaylene Cook, originally from Cambridge in Waikato, posted a picture to her almost 300,000 Instagram followers wearing little more than a beanie and gloves. Our Taranaki reporter Robin Martin has more.
Ms Cook's post has attracted about 8,600 likes and more than 300 comments almost universally celebrating her achievement, including one from Venture Taranaki, the local development agency. The 25-year-old lives on the Gold Coast but is travelling around New Zealand with her partner, Josh Shaw, who took the photograph. Ms Cook says the decision to take the photo was a spur-of-the-moment thing and they did not intend to offend anyone.
Well, because we were wearing so many layers because it was so cold on the hike up, we just, after reaching the top, we had such a sense of achievement. We just, I wanted to strip off and just embrace it, I guess. And it was such a beautiful day up there and it just felt like something we wanted to do, so we did it.
The glamour model says they had done some research and thought by taking the photo down from the summit, they hadn't breached Māori tikanga.
Because I'm from New Zealand, I respect and admire the Māori heritage and culture, so we knew what not to do, and I believe that we didn't do anything. We believe that what we did wasn't degrading in any way or offensive.
Dennis Nafri is the chairman of the Puniho Pa Trust, which has a close affinity with the Maunga, and he wrote his philosophy doctorate about Mount Taranaki. Dr Nafri says the couple's research left a little to be desired.
We consider the Taranaki Maunga as an ancestor, and the summit in particular as tapu, or restricted. We don't stop people going up to the summit. Well, we can't, for one thing, but we don't stop people from going up there because people do go up to the summit. However, we do ask that people be respectful.
Dr Nafri says the whole summit area is tapu, and for most Māori, Ms Cook's behaviour wouldn't have met the expected standard.
In my opinion, I think this whole story in the photograph falls into the inappropriate behaviour category, similar to the barbecue up the mountain, the trampoline up the mountain, and other behaviours that have happened over the years.
Dr Nafri says Taranaki Māori accept that people will climb the mountain, but when their behaviour is inappropriate, it's important to point it out to prevent other people doing the same thing. Meanwhile, Ms Cook is already planning her next photographic exploits.
We were showing waterfalls yesterday, so we've got some very similar images in that location also, and we're in Mahia today and Gisborne tonight, so we're just going to keep cruising, doing what we're doing and exploring New Zealand and all its little secrets and just expose it to the world, I guess, and expose ourselves in the process.
Ms Cook says she's sorry if her actions on Mount Taranaki have upset Māori, but she still believes she acted appropriately. In Taranaki for Checkpoint, ko Robin Martin tēnei.
So much feedback on this story on religion in state schools. Robin says religious instruction in state schools needs to be replaced with discussion and emphasis on tolerance, understanding and acceptance of all diverse religions, cultures and ethnicities. David says teach neither religion nor evolution at school. Overreaction by the mother. Religious studies has been optional for decades, even in the 1960s. My mother pulled me out of class, not the school, says Dallas. John says rather than teaching religion in state schools, we should be teaching morals and ethics. Paul says, hi John, I'm a teacher who can see no rational reason to teach RE unless it's taught, for example, as part of a belief and culture unit in social studies. What we do need more than ever is a robust ethics program. Adrian from Rotorua says there's plenty of time outside of school for religion. Don't indoctrinate kids when they haven't got the maturity to decide for themselves. And that is a representative sample. Overwhelmingly, you're against it.
RNZ News at 6. Good evening, I'm Anna Thomas. The media company NZME believes it is strong enough to survive despite the rejection of its merger with Fairfax. The Commerce Commission has rejected the proposed merger, saying it would create too great a concentration of media power. NZME's Chief Executive Michael Boggs says his company will scrutinise the Commission's rationale for the decision and is considering an appeal. But he told Checkpoint they've spent the past year assuming the merger would not go ahead.
I'd be the first to say print is challenged. I don't stand here and say I think print's going to be a growth business for us into the future. We've slowed the decline, which I'm really proud of, but people are moving from print and to digital. And one of our key priorities is actually developing new revenue streams, and we'll continue to do that.
Michael Boggs. Fairfax's Chief Operating Officer Andrew Boyle told the program a diversity of voices in the news media can only exist if the businesses have a sustainable economic model.
Plurality is best preserved by having a sustainable economic model to fund journalism in the first place. And the Commission heard from a range of editors about the processes and the freedom they have to express their own perspectives on the mastheads or the websites in which they operate.
Andrew Boyle says the company now needs to find a way to continue to deliver good local journalism throughout the country. The government denies it's manipulating the numbers to make its violent crime reduction target easier to reach. The Prime Minister today outlined a new set of 10 targets for the delivery of better public services, including reducing the number of serious crime victims by 10,000 by 2021. That's well down on the target set 5 years ago. In 2012, the government set an aim of reducing violent crime by 20%, or 7,500 fewer crimes a year by June 2017. But as of March this year, only 2% had been reached. The Justice Minister Amy Adams says the new goal of 10,000 fewer serious crimes by 2021, or 2,000 fewer each year, is easier to measure and understand. The Inspector General of Intelligence and Security has found that up until a few years ago, the Security Intelligence Service's electronic record-keeping systems for security clearances were not secure enough. Cheryl Gwynn has released her second report into how the SIS collects and holds that information. Here's our political editor, Jane Patterson.
Procedures were changed after the first report found some information had been accessed for purposes other than vetting. The second report took a broader view at the systems themselves. Ms Gwynn says that before being urgently updated, the 4 systems holding highly sensitive information required for security clearances did not meet mandatory government standards. The SIS has been investigating whether there were any security breaches while the systems were non-compliant, but says it has so far found none. From Parliament, Jane Patterson.
A woman who's part of a human rights review tribunal case about religious instruction in schools says her children were mistreated for not believing in God. The Secular Education Network is taking the government to the tribunal because although the Bill of Rights Act prohibits religious favouritism in state schools, the Education Act allows it. The network's spokesperson, David Hines, has gathered 26 witnesses for the case, including 13 parents who say their children were bullied in Bible classes. One of them is Tanya Jacob of Christchurch.
We knew there was going to be these Bible classes, so we just opted out. Over time, we found that our kids were being put back in, and we found that the kids were being told things like you're going to hell and just generally badgered for not believing in God.
Tanya Jacob, a date is yet to be set for the tribunal hearing. A body's been found near the Manukau Heads, south of Auckland. The police believe it is that of a 58-year-old Rotorua man, Timothy John Watkins, who was reported missing on Monday. He was last seen going out for a ride on his motorbike, and the body was found this afternoon near a motorbike. The Otago Peninsula community has asked people to refrain from fishing in the inner harbour for 5 days out of respect for a woman who died. Nick Headley, who worked at Otago Marae, was found dead on the rocks of Goat Island near Port Chalmers yesterday afternoon. She'd gone missing from Harrington Point in the early hours of Sunday morning. Paul Pope, who chairs the local board, says the Otago Runanga of Ngai Tahu has placed a Rahui on fishing or gathering seafood from the inner harbour surrounding Goat Island. He says although it's not a formal ban, he is appealing to people to honour it, as the practice has been observed in the harbour for centuries. It's 6:05. The gloves are off ahead of next week's heavyweight title fight between WBO title holder Joseph Parker and contender Razvan Kojanu. The Romanian's camp is unhappy with the contract arrangements for the fight after he was called in as a late replacement for Britain's Hughie Fury. Kojanu's trainer, John Arthur, says Duco have handled the fight poorly, with the changes giving Parker a series of opportunities for a rematch should he lose.
Razvan and myself started thinking, do you really want to fight or do you want to pull the plug on the fight? We've had 3 different contracts in front of us. That's what really kind of irritates me. We signed the first contract before we got on the plane. We get here, it's revised, it's made. I don't like that.
John Arthur. The return to play of All Blacks and Hurricanes hooker Dane Coles has been further complicated. Coles hasn't played since mid-March because of leg injuries. Hurricanes coach Chris Boyd says they're at a loss to work out why he's now suffering headaches when he doesn't seem to have suffered a head knock. The Melbourne Victory and All Whites player Marco Rojas has been named in the A-League Team of the Year. No Phoenix players feature in the lineup. The Newcastle and former New South Wales State of Origin player Jared Mullen has been suspended from rugby league for 4 years for using banned steroids. And that's the news.
No more perks for Kiwis in Australia.
$126,000 over 3 years. It makes no sense at all to do this.
Who's helping Kiwis at home?
It says a lot about who's helping, that the person that gave this person shelter was someone that had no shelter themselves.
And what would a future MP do about it?
I've experienced the housing crisis firsthand. When I moved up to Auckland, I had applied in a 2.5-week period to 55 houses and got nothing.
News you can't afford to miss. Morning reports with Guy Espiner and Susie Ferguson, weekdays from 6. Then on 9 to noon, how New Zealand's aid money is spent and what it means for the world's poorest people. And after 10, 3 Kiwi farmers on the stories behind the meat that ends up on our plates. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
Another short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland to Manukau, also Coromandel and the central high country. Cloud gradually increasing. A few showers but rain tonight until early tomorrow morning. Bay of Plenty, Gisborne and Hawke's Bay. Rain spreading north tonight, turning to a few showers tomorrow. Horowhenua, Kapiti, Wellington and Wairarapa. Showers turning to rain for a time this evening. Northwesterlies gusting 110 k's in exposed places. Nelson and Marlborough, rain developing this evening, becoming fine tomorrow. Bulla, Westland and Fiordland, heavy rain spreading north, easing to a few showers. Long fine periods in Westland tomorrow. For Canterbury, scattered rain developing this afternoon, then occasional showers. Northwesterlies gusting 130 kilometres an hour in exposed places this afternoon. Otago and Southland, occasional showers, and for the Chatham Islands, mostly cloudy. Rain tomorrow morning, followed by a few showers. RNZ National, it is 6:08. You're listening to Checkpoint with John Campbell.
Thank you very much indeed, Anna Thomas. Lots and lots of feedback still coming in on religious education in schools. Thank you. We will bring you more. The big story of the day, well, a couple of big stories today, but it would have dominated national and local newspapers and local news online, as well as owning half the country's commercial radio stations. 90% of newspaper circulation would have come from this one company. But the competition watchdog has knocked back a proposed merger which would have created New Zealand's biggest single news media company. In fact, bigger than the next three combined. Last November, the Commerce Commission said it didn't like the idea, prompting a flurry of submissions from the media companies, NZME and Fairfax, and the lawyers and consultants they hired, of course, but it was all to no avail. Colin Peacock from RNZ's Media Watch takes a look at reaction to the decision and what could happen next.
There is no status quo of the business that we have today. In the first half of this year, our print revenues went backwards 14%. Our digital grew 20%, our revenue still went backwards.
That was Michael Boggs, the chief executive of media company NZME, which owns the New Zealand Herald, telling the Commerce Commission last November the outlook for his company was bleak. Most of the company's revenue still comes from old-fashioned newspapers, but it's falling fast, while the income from digital advertising is growing too slowly, and most of that gets sucked up by offshore online giants like Google and Facebook. And NZME's big rival in the market, Fairfax Media, faces exactly the same problems. Together, they said they could fight back in the online market and not only cut their costs, but also the things they were doubling up on, like chasing and publishing the same routine news stories every day. And Fairfax's chief editor Sinead Boucher said, as one big company, they could buy time to build a sustainable business for the digital age.
So our innovation is really being focused on how do we maintain our ability to serve New Zealanders with local journalism and, keep extending that runway as much as we can.
But giving a thumbs down to a merger this morning in Wellington, the Commerce Commission disagreed with Fairfax and NZME about their futures without a merger. And Chair Dr Mark Berry said one big merged company would be too big in the market for news.
We are satisfied that the merger would reduce plurality through the concentration of media ownership to an extent that would be unprecedented in a well-established liberal democracy.
Dr Berry went on to say the likes of TVNZ, RNZ and MediaWorks would not be able to fill the gap if quality and diversity of news and opinion dropped at a merged Fairfax and NZME. And that's something NZME's Michael Boggs took exception to on 9 to Noon.
Now, please excuse the irony, as I watched a little bit of that on the media conference that he was running. I looked at the number of microphones that were standing in front of him, which were at least 10. And that says to me, actually, there's a big diversity of voices and there'll be a lot of quality coming out of that.
The Commerce Act does allow for an anti-competitive merger if there is a public benefit, but the Commission saw no such benefit for us, the consumers of news. And the Chief Executive of Consumer, Sue Chetwin, who was formerly a newspaper editor at Fairfax Media, agrees.
Competition is everything. If you were left with just one large news site, say the Herald or Stuff, whichever one they decided to keep, the competition would be off and that would be poor for consumers.
The lobby group, the Coalition for Better Broadcasting, also said the Commerce Commission's decision has rightly prioritised the interests of the New Zealand public. But the Coalition's chair, Dr Peter Thompson, said, don't blame Fairfax and NZME. He said the big problem is the loss of revenues to Google and Facebook, which co-opt online news but contribute nothing to the cost of it, and the government now needs to take action. But having pinned their hopes on a merger, what now for Fairfax Media and NZME? Both companies are still currently profitable, but late last year, the boss of Fairfax Media's parent company in Australia, Greg Highwood, flew in to tell the Commerce Commission bluntly it would be endgame in New Zealand without a merger. Now, he didn't say what endgame meant, and we may be about to find out. Cutbacks, closures and job losses for journalists and for others could soon follow at Fairfax Media, especially in the regions. At that merger conference last year, Chief Editor Sinead Boucher told the Commerce Commission this.
It's not going to be Auckland and Wellington and Christchurch that suffer, it's going to be Marlborough, Nelson, Timaru, Manukau, Taranaki, those small places where, unfortunately, you haven't got as big a newsrooms as TVNZ, News Hub, RNZ, etc.
And having said there was no status quo for the business last year, is there an NZME Plan B from CEO Michael Boggs?
Will we continue to look for efficiencies? Absolutely. Will we continue to look where titles are performing or not? We absolutely will. But that's just been the way we've operated the business over the last year or so, and it's BAU for us.
BAU meaning business as usual, but unless he opts for a costly and time-consuming appeal of the Commerce Commission's decision in the High Court, the business he'll be running won't be the big beast that he and his counterparts at Fairfax Media were hoping to create. For Checkpoint, Colin Peacock.
Selwyn locals have thrown their support behind a rebel regional councillor who's criticised the organisation's record on polluted waterways. Last month, the chair of a Canterbury Regional Council Water Committee complained about the newly elected council, Lan Farm, and called for unity. Conan Young reports on the backlash.
And you're saying we've got to share the pain. We are sharing the pain. Our lake is highly polluted. Our rivers are really polluted. Our drinking water. Did you address drinking water? Because nitrates are getting into our drinking water.
You just understand, mate.
No, you don't understand. You don't.
Selwyn resident Mike Glover telling the chairperson of the Selwyn Waihora Zone Committee, Alan Lim, who penned a letter complaining about Councillor Lan Farm, that her criticisms were more than justified.
I think you're out of line, and I actually think that the Water Zone Committee, if that's your opinion of the democratic process where people can't get up and say what they think, then I think you're sadly misled.
Locals in the Selwyn Waihora catchment are facing mounting costs in cleaning up after historic land use change and rapid intensification. Mike Glover reminded Mr Lim that Miss Farm received more votes than any other regional councillor and spoke for a lot of people unhappy about the state of the region's waterways.
We lost democracy 7 years ago, and we got a bit back last year, and we need to celebrate the fact that somebody elected is putting a hand up and saying, hey, all is not well here.
Another resident, Helen Duckworth, told the meeting that planning rules criticised by Miss Farm were rushed through without proper consultation.
And if you'd said to our community, do you want intensive agriculture and this is what it will bring, all the benefits, all the negatives, or do you want to be able to drink your water without fear of nitrates in the next 30 years, or swim in your rivers, I know what the community would have said.
The Canterbury Regional Council estimates that even without more land intensification in the catchment, there will be a 35% increase in nitrogen entering Te Waihora Lake in the next 10 to 20 years. The current nitrogen load in the Selwyn Waihora catchment is 3,200 tonnes a year, and with more irrigation coming on stream, it will increase by 80%. But new measures for farms aim to restrict those increases to 50%. Farmers now need a plan with a nutrient budget, and every year for 3 years they're audited to ensure they comply with that farm plan. If they don't, then they will not get access to the irrigated water. For his part, the Selwyn Waihora Zone Committee chairperson Alan Lim said a lot of work went into deciding the pollution limits that would be imposed on dairy farmers.
That target took a long time to kind of came to, and then it's about keeping people in businesses as well. No, it's not a particularly good one for you, but the thing is, there was a lot of debate, and we've gone through the process, with the hearing commissioners, with submissions and stuff like that, and that's where we arrived at.
The council's head scientist, Stephanie Rixecker, said there were further planning changes in the pipeline that would impose new limits on dairy farmers.
Councillor Farm has raised questions at the table about should we revisit those end limits. It is for the community to be able to work together and to debate and to argue those end limits. You certainly have every need to hold us to account.
Councillor Farm declined to comment on Mr Lim's complaint or the support shown for her by residents. In Selwyn Waihora and elsewhere, the issue of water quality is one that is likely to continue to be controversial. In Ototahi for Checkpoint, ko Conan Young tēnei.
17 and a bit past 6, the National Party is defending its use of a song said to be similar to one by American rapper Eminem. In advertising for its 2014 election campaign, Eminem's music publisher 8 Mile Style is suing the party in the High Court in Wellington, saying the campaign music was very similar to the rapper's song Lose Yourself. In his opening address this afternoon, the National Party's lawyer Greg Arthur said the Eminem-esque track was provided by a music production library. He said libraries provide tracks known as sound-alikes, which are designed to be similar to well-known music without infringing the copyright or the original composition. Our court reporter Anne-Marie May was at this fairly bizarre old hearing. Hi Annie, what other points did National's lawyer make today?
Hi John. Well, Greg Arthur said that Michael Cohen, who wrote Eminem-esque, had put it into music libraries which would sell it for use in advertising, in films and television, and the Nats paid just under $5,000 to use the music. He said that witnesses for 8 Mile Style had said that the music on the National Party ad campaign was weak, bland and light, and he said that was because it didn't replicate the Eminem original. He said if a substantial part of the Eminem song wasn't reproduced for the ad campaign, that meant there was no breach of copyright, and it wasn't enough for a listener to hear similarities between the two pieces of music.
What other points did National's lawyer make, Mr Arthur, say on behalf of the National Party? And did he do so in rhyming couplets, Annie? That's what I want to know.
No, there was none of that, John. It's all been very sort of dry, courty material, really.
Bummer.
Yeah. Well, you could say that. He said those involved in the campaign became aware that this music might sound like Eminem, and they were quite concerned because they understood that Eminem might have been associated with hate speech. The party was also concerned about possible copyright repercussions, and so it checked with groups like APRA, which does music licensing, and all those people said to them, it's fine, you've got nothing to worry about. Mr Arthur quoted from emails from those groups, including one that said that if any issues arose, the responsibility was 100% with the publisher, not with the National Party for using it. He said also that 8 Mile Style was seeking a large amount of damages based on what it might have charged for using the music, but he said the level of damages is a matter for the court, not a matter for the plaintiff to actually raise itself.
Right, so that's what the lawyer's saying on behalf of the party. Who's going to give evidence for the National Party?
Well, we're hearing at present from Jo Dejoux, she ran the 2014 ad campaign, and another party official is also going to give evidence about what they heard from the music publishers and the music libraries. There's also going to be evidence from a production library president about how these work, how people make music that goes into the libraries and that sort of thing. We're also going to hear from the New Zealand singer Jan Hellriegel and an expert in music licensing. Now, the case was supposed to finish on Monday, John, but it looks now like it might be going further into next week because some witnesses aren't available until Monday.
An extended dance remix, Annie.
That's
Excellent.
the one.
Anne-Marie May, thank you so much, Annie. Nice to talk to you. Hillary Clinton has been mulling over what cost her the top job. Mrs Clinton pointed to interference from Russian hackers, and the FBI Director James Comey is tipping the balance against her in the final days of that extraordinary campaign. During a very rare public interview at a conference in New York, the former Secretary of State also questioned Donald Trump's foreign policies. The ABC's David Cody has more.
6 months since her election loss, Hillary Clinton is raking over where it all went wrong.
You know, if the election had been on October 27th, I'd be your president. And it wasn't. It was on October 28th, and there was just a lot of funny business going on around that.
Surrounded by a sympathetic crowd, the former Democratic candidate for president spoke at a fundraiser for the Women for Women charity. She told CNN's Christiane Amanpour Russian hackers and a controversial letter from the FBI director about her use of a private email server changed the course of the campaign.
It wasn't a perfect campaign. There is no such thing. But I was on the way to winning until the combination of Jim Comey's letter on October 28th and Russian WikiLeaks raised doubts in the minds of people who were inclined to vote for me but got scared off.
Mrs Clinton is now in what she calls the painful process of writing a book, and she promises plenty of juicy details.
Did we make mistakes? Of course we did. Did I make mistakes? Oh my gosh, yes. You know, you'll read my confession and my request for absolution. But the reason why I believe we lost were the intervening events in the last 10 days.
The former Secretary of State is sceptical about President Donald Trump's engagements with the world, particularly a suggestion he'd be honoured to meet the North Korean leader, Kim Jong-un.
The North Koreans are always interested, not just Kim Jong-un, but his father before him. We're always interested in trying to get Americans to come to negotiate, to elevate their status and their position. And we should be very careful about giving that away.
Mrs. Clinton revealed she did support President Trump's strike on Syria, but has questions about how much the administration cooperated with the Russians.
I mean, we later learned that the Russians and the Syrians moved jets off the runway, that the Russians may have been given a heads up even before our own Congress was.
Seemingly bitter about Russian interference in the election campaign, Mrs. Clinton spoke out about rigged elections in Russia and President Vladimir Putin.
Well, he certainly interfered in our election, and it was clear he interfered to hurt me and to help my opponent.
The woman who missed out on becoming the United States' first female president reminded the audience she earned 3 million more votes than Mr. Trump. She thinks misogyny and sexism was a factor in her loss.
I do think it played a role. I think other things did as well. Every day that goes by, we learn more about some of the unprecedented interference, including from a foreign power.
Mrs. Clinton had a parting barb for the president about the challenges he faces in office.
You know, I wasn't going to appeal to people's emotions in the same way that my opponent did, which I think is frankly what's getting him into all kinds of difficulties now, because, you know, healthcare is complicated. And so is foreign policy and other stuff that lands on a president's desk. I mean, if it's easy, it doesn't get to the president's desk.
Hillary Clinton ending that report from the ABC's David Cody. Let's go to France now, where candidate Macron is one step away from winning the presidency. He is an improbable front runner. He's relatively young, politically untested. He has no party backing. He quotes philosophers in campaign speeches. He's a centrist. He's a leading pro-Europe campaigner at a time of deep Euroscepticism. The 39-year-old is leading the polls against the far-right National Front leader Marine Le Pen as they race towards the presidential runoff on Sunday. All of that stuff is important, but as CNN's Melissa Bell reports, it's the Macron marriage which is starting to capture the world's attention.
Their relationship has caught the attention of the world. The favourite to become the next president of France and his wife, his former teacher. Macron was 15 when he met Brigitte Trogneux. She was a 40-year-old married teacher at his school in northern France.
He was the friend, you know, of the teachers of the high school. You know, he had dinner with them.
Jean-Baptiste de Froment, an old school friend, says that Emmanuel Macron always did what was expected of him, except when it came to Brigitte. At age 17, Macron reluctantly left Amiens, but not before telling Brigitte that one day he would marry her. And by the time he arrived in Paris, says Jean-Baptiste, he certainly avoided the girls of his own age.
I think they were maybe too young to be interesting for him.
14 years after first meeting, they were married. But not before Macron asked her 3 children, one of whom was his age, 29 at the time, for their permission.
It's a powerful act, because not everyone would have taken that precaution to come and ask us for her hand in marriage. I mean, it wasn't quite like that, but he did want to know if this was something we could accept.
Macron says that becoming a family was an important step for him as he turned an improbable relationship into what he calls the commitment of a lifetime. He's now 39 and she's 64 with 7 grandchildren.
We do not have a classic family, it's undeniable. But is there less love in this family? I do not think so. Maybe there's even more than in conventional families.
Trogneux is now at the center of the campaign, unusual in French politics, visible but not voluble, for now.
I'll start speaking in 2 months, and then I'll never be quiet again.
So what kind of first lady would she be?
She wouldn't be paid for it by taxpayers. But she certainly will have an existence. She will have her own take on things. She will always be by my side, of course.
An unconventional story, to be sure, but one that Emmanuel Macron has used in his campaign, saying that it shows that once his heart is set, his determination and commitment are then unwavering.
Melissa Bell reporting from Paris. So much feedback on the story that we brought you in the first hour of the program tonight about the teaching of religious education in state schools, and the parent who said that their child was told to be good or they would go to hell. Hi, John. I withdrew my children from Christian studies after the instructor told my son that God made night and day and the seasons. As an atheist family of scientists, our kids were brought up having the Earth's rotation and axis in relation to the sun explained to them. The school was not able to offer general interfaith studies or set any other work during that time. The excluded kids had to sit outside in frosty Marlborough mornings while the teachers were more concerned about having staff meetings during that time. And the few kids not in RE were considered a total inconvenience. Enjoying the show, as always, says Mary. Thank you, Mary. I think it should be made clear that in many cases RE in schools is taught by volunteers, local church people and not trained teachers. I taught in the UK where RE is a subject taught in state schools. All religions are taught. I learned so much teaching about other faiths and had some amazing discussions with students about their faith and non-faith. In this multicultural world, I think it's important and feel disappointed that some ruin it for all. I am an RE teacher, says Pam, who sticks to the rules about what we're allowed to say or not to say. We are only in the school as guests and have a code of behaviour to adhere to. In my experience, RE volunteers are faithful to this. 40 years ago, I was harangued at a state primary school and told that I and my family were evil and would go to hell because we didn't go to church. Has it still not changed? Asked Chris of Wellington. In Sydney, my grandsons chose ethics instead of religious instruction, both taught by volunteers outside the school staff, says Maggie. And finally tonight, John, I think basic human values of compassion, concern for others, etc. Human values, as we all need today. We all need day to day is what's important in schools. Those threads could be looked at across religious and philosophies, even atheism. Thank you, Celia. Thank you for listening to us. Thank you for being with us. And hopefully you will join us again tomorrow at 5.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Good evening, I'm Anna Thomas. The media company NZME believes it is strong enough to survive despite the rejection of its merger with Fairfax. The government denies it's manipulating the numbers to make its violent crime reduction target easier to reach. The SIS's electronic record-keeping systems for security clearances were not secure enough up until a few years ago. A woman who is part of a Human Rights Review Tribunal case about religious instruction in schools says her children were mistreated for not believing in God. And at least 4 people have been killed in a suicide bombing, apparently targeting a convoy of armoured personnel carriers in Kabul. Our next news and weather is at 7.
Tonight on Inside Out, Clifford Brown, Stefan Grappelli and